In our darkest moments, we often wonder how we could ever get over it and get through. Today's guest has gone through something that most people hope they would never experience and could imagine they could never get through, but she did. We'll talk about that today. Welcome back to the Get Overit Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Christopher Fasano. Before we begin today's episode, I just want to remind everyone the best place to get new episodes of the show is to subscribe to your favorite pod player, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. You can also watch these interviews on YouTube, so please check YouTube out. Give it a subscribe. If you're really enjoying the show, we ask you please to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That way other people can learn more about the show. It'll help it move up in the rankings and more people can learn how to get over it. Okay, so I'm really excited and humbled to have our guest today on the show. Our guest is Jennifer Hendricks-Fogg. She is an independent benefits consultant for Aflac and the founder and president of the Logan Strong Foundation, which provides support services to pediatric cancer patients and their families. She's also the author of Tiny Miracles. I have the book here, so I'm going to show everyone the book here, A Mother's Journey of Finding Faith Through Childhood Cancer. It's an incredible story, and you can hear me like getting emotional already. I hope I can make it through the whole interview. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I really want to talk to you a lot about this, but I want to understand, I've just met you. So
sure.
Tell me about yourself. Are you from this area up here?
Yep.
Where are you from?
I'm born and raised in Colony.
Okay.
So Colony high grad.
So for everyone who's not from this area, Colony, New York is it Albany County?
Yep.
Where are we? It's Albany County.
Yep.
It's like about 10 minutes from where we are in Albany,
Yep.
about northwest a little bit.
And fun fact, I don't know if you knew this, Colony is actually the largest township in America.
I think someone told me that recently. It's crazy.
Fun fact, yeah.
I know. It's an awesome place. There's so much to do out in Colony. It really is.
Yep.
So you were born there and you lived there. You
Yep.
went to school there.
Yep.
High school.
Yep.
Public school.
Yep,
And then
correct.
college.
I did. I went to Hudson Valley.
Oh, okay. All right, great. So you've been here.
Local. Yeah, I lived out of state. I lived in California for a little bit, lived in Florida for a little bit, but New York has always brought me back, so.
Well, I lived in Florida for college. How was your experience getting away from New York? Did you like it?
If I went back to California right now to visit, I don't think I'd come home.
Really?
I love California.
So you loved it?
Florida, not so much.
Yeah, I could never live back in Florida.
No, I don't mind visiting
Although my
Florida.
wife and I will frequently, like in the dead of winter, be like, what are we doing? Why are we here? We should just move to Florida. And then like we go to Florida to visit and I'm like, yeah, but it's Florida.
It's flat.
Nothing against Florida,
It's
right?
flat and it's humid. Not
So
for me.
where in California did you go?
Northern California.
Northern California.
Redding, Chico area.
It's beautiful.
Absolutely.
The climate is so different too in California, wherever you are.
I never understood the difference between heat and humidity until I lived on the West Coast.
Yep.
And I still remember.
Oh man, I know.
There was a day when I lived out there. It was a record-setting high of 120 degrees.
Oof, God.
Sitting in the hot tub, looking at the mountains covered in snow.
That's bizarre.
I don't ski or surf, but it's like the only place you can go
That
where you
is
could do the
crazy.
same, do both in the same day.
Humidity is something that like is just offensive. I lived in
Agreed.
Miami.
Oof.
And it's one thing if you go to visit Miami. You go to visit Miami, you go in the fall, you go in the winter, whatever. It's beautiful. It's like tropical. You live in Miami through a summer, it's like stifling. I mean, humidity is like, it gets humid. I'm talking like you feel it, like you can't, when you could put your hands through it. It's
You can't
like,
breathe.
And people are like, hey, why aren't you at the beach today? I'm like, beach? What are you, nuts? I'm not leaving my house. It's funny how that happens, right? You go to a warm place, you stay inside of the air conditioning. You live in the winter, you stay inside in the heat. It's like humans, I feel like, are never really happy with wherever they are.
True story.
It's really what happens. Okay, so then you meet your husband around here, or is he local too?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So my husband's from Scotia.
Okay.
We actually met, for those of people that are local, at O'Toole's, which is like,
Yes, I know
it's
O'Toole's.
like the local Cheers.
Okay.
But interesting enough, I met my husband 25 years ago. I used to date one of his friends when I was younger.
Oh man, I love these stories.
So I knew his name, but like I wouldn't know him if I tripped over him. So we reconnected, and it just happened. It just clicked. We were in our mid 30s when we met, which is interesting because typically at that age there's exes, children, and neither
Right.
of us had that.
Right.
So it was a nice fresh start for the both of us.
And you've been married. You're still married.
We're still married.
And you've been married.
We've been married now 7 years.
7 years.
We've
Okay.
been together 11, I believe.
Okay. And so then like many marriages, you decide that you want to have children.
Yep.
And from what I read about you, you went through IVF to have your child.
Correct.
Okay. And I don't know if you're comfortable telling me this,
Yeah.
but was it that you couldn't conceive, or it was just that it was part of your time of your life?
I was old.
Okay. All
I was
right.
old.
And it was like a timing thing?
Correct.
Okay.
So
All right.
we tried for about 6 months, and the doctor said typically they tell people to try for about a year.
Okay.
But because I was 39 at the time,
Okay.
they said, try for 6 months. And then there was nothing wrong with my husband or I. Both of our tests were fine. And it was basically just a steroid shot
Okay.
that just get you going, and they time everything.
And you conceived fairly soon, or no? It took
initially.
Okay.
As soon as we went to IVF, they gave me the shot. They tell you when to do the deed, and then they tell you when to take the pregnancy test, and it worked like clockwork.
Okay.
So first shot and done.
And what hospital did you have him at?
Albany Med.
Albany Med. Okay. So the pregnancy, everything was normal with your pregnancy? Was it like...
For the most part. Yeah.
Okay.
So when I got pregnant, I knew because of my age, and I was born at Albany Med, even though we currently live in Scotia, so there's other hospitals closer. I knew I wanted to give birth at Albany Med because, God forbid, there was something wrong with me or my child.
Correct.
I would be in the right place.
Yes, that's for sure. Yep.
So and because of my age, I luckily enough had extra ultrasounds. So they were monitoring me and the baby. And at our last ultrasound, they noticed that there was fluid on my son's brain.
Okay.
So we were at the doctor's the entire day that day, just trying to figure things out.
How far into the pregnancy? How far is this?
I was about 35 weeks at this point.
Okay. All right.
And
but that's all they could tell. That's all they could ascertain to that point.
Correct.
Okay.
And then a week later, they scheduled me for an emergency MRI to find out what was going on. Doing an MRI when you're 35 weeks pregnant is not comfortable.
Do you fit in the tube thing?
Barely. It was so
because I went for an MRI for my shoulder for the first time, and this is they're a little bit bigger nowadays, and even that got me a little my heart started racing a little bit. It was a little uncomfortable.
Well, it was interesting enough too. At the time, I don't recall the reasoning, but Albany Med had literally a tractor trailer outside of that part of the hospital because they had so many MRIs they were doing, or the machines were getting fixed. I don't know. And I had to go into a tractor trailer and have the MRI. It was this whole setup. So it was.
So they wanted to see what they can find.
Correct.
So what did they see at that point?
So they found it was a brain bleed. So I had the MRI that morning, and by 5 or 6 o'clock, the doctor hadn't called. So I was like, oh, everything must be okay. Around 7 o'clock that night, the doctor called and said, so we want you to check into the hospital tomorrow for further testing. And right then and there, I knew
you were like, something's not right.
I knew something was wrong. I knew that when I went into the hospital the next day, I was having a kid.
Right.
And I said to my husband, I go, we're having a kid tomorrow. He's
but
like,
is
no,
that
we're
all
not.
they told you though on the phone? Okay.
But I did ask her, I said, should I pack a bag?
Right.
Should I pack my bag? Should I pack the baby's bag? She's like, you may want to just to be safe. So we get to the hospital, and the radiologist basically told us that he had a deadly platelet disorder called NAIT, and he did not have a good bedside manner at all. And I looked him in the face, and I had a few choice words for him, and I said, get him out and fix him.
Right. It's not an option here.
Yeah.
Right.
So then the NICU doctor came in, and he was so kind and so generous and so sweet.
Which I gotta say, if that's going to be your job, in a NICU, and you're going to be dealing with, newborns with issues, you better be able to have a communication style.
The radiologist was awful.
People are at it's like a disastrous point in someone's life, and you're going to give them not great news, or you're dealing with situations. So I have to imagine, I hope that's part of the gig, but not always.
The radiologist, not so much, but the NICU doctor, and I can't remember his last name to save the life of me because he told me to call him by his first name, so I always call him Dr. Michael. Mm-hmm. He basically said, look, we don't know what it is. It could be a million things,
right,
but we need to get him out and figure it out.
So we can figure it out, right.
So he gave us the choice. They gave me steroid injections to help the baby's lungs. And they said, you can do an extra dose tomorrow, and we can, do an emergency C-section tomorrow, or we can do it today. And I was like, well, what do you think? And he goes, it's your choice. He goes, but babies younger have survived. So I was like, let's just do it. So we did it that day. I had an emergency C-section. And Albany Med's a teaching hospital.
Right.
So I remember.
I went to Albany Med for my doctorate. So
We're so lucky to have them here. And I remember as she told me she was going to cut me open wider than normal because there was a brain bleed and they wanted to make sure that they had enough room to get him out. Yep. And I remember her saying, and again, I don't remember the doctor's name, because there were students there. She said, "I'm taking the baby out." Like she's the one. We're
not messing around here.
No, she did it.
Right.
And it was a drive-by. They were like, "Here's your kid."
And that was it.
Off he went into this room like over here, and I got to like kiss his cheek, and then he was gone. So
now you're in recovery. You're recovering. How long before they come to tell you anything? Did they?
So it took me about 8 hours to recover. Okay. My husband got to hold him first. Okay. You know, the one thing I wanted, I remember, is that I just want to hear him cry. Right. And he did. He came out kicking and screaming. So I was we're good. I spent 4 days in the hospital. He spent 5 days in the hospital. He being your son? My son.
Okay.
Logan. And they tested him for anything and everything. And the conclusion was it was a birth defect.
Okay.
So they're like, we're just going to monitor it. It's a brain bleed. It'll hopefully dissipate on its own. So he was born November 18th. At the end of December that year, he had an MRI and the brain bleed was dissipating. Doctors were happy with it. They said, why don't we start PT just to be safe? Mm-hmm. But, things are looking good.
They didn't see anything on that scan? Okay.
So then on March 8th of 2018, we had a follow-up
3
MRI.
Months. That's 3 months roughly. Yep.
He was about 3.5 months old at that time. We had a follow-up MRI, and I remember it like yesterday.
I imagine you do.
We've been blessed to have pretty much all the same doctors we've had since the day he was born. So our oncologist, our neurosurgeon, our neurologist, our developmental pediatrician, all the same since day one. So when we went for the follow-up MRI on March 8th, we went right to the doctor's office afterwards, and I remember he waited for the nurse to close the door before he said anything to us, and he had never done that before. And
it's so interesting what you notice in those situations. You know what I mean? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're fine. And he told us it was a malignant brain tumor, and it took me a minute. Like, malignant, is that cancer or not? It took me a minute, right, to kind of, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then honestly, the rest is
did you hear anything else?
The rest is a blur, to be honest. The rest is a blur. I remember they brought us up to one of the side rooms in the PICU, which is the pediatric ICU. And I had a girlfriend that worked at the hospital. Another girlfriend came to see me. My parents came. My husband's parents were in North Carolina, so they got in the car and just started driving up. And they told me that, unfortunately, they thought it was either ATRT or a glioblastoma.
Yeah.
And I had recently lost a very close friend to a glioblastoma, like a few months earlier.
Which are one of the most, if not aggressive, brain tumors.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they told us, we're so sorry. There's not much we can do. Then they asked us, when's the first time did he have a seizure? And I was like, he's never had a seizure. They're like, really? And they had told us that if we would have waited a week later, it probably would have been too late. So I said...
Now, I saw the scan, by the way. I don't know where I saw it. You might have put it somewhere.
I think I posted it.
And, it's incredible when you look at the size.
It was a third of the size of his head.
I mean, it was just... I was, shocking. And so, when I read things like this and I hear this story, I'm putting myself in that room. And I have a 9-year-old boy. And I'm thinking to myself, if I hear that, I imagine things go kind of dark. Kind of like, it's like that in the movies where the speech starts to, and that's all you hear. Yeah. I'm imagining, I don't process it just yet. So what they tell you that, what happens? So now you're with your husband. Are you guys and when does it finally, when does it hit you? And what is that like?
Yeah,
I know it's probably very hard to put into words, but I mean, I imagine it's just everything's destroyed.
Yeah,
in you, right?
It's your world changes in a split second.
In one, yeah.
And my response to all of these negative discussions was, I didn't wait till I was 40 to have my first kid for God to take him away.
Right.
So
what are we
figure it
gonna
out.
do?
What do we do to fix this?
Right.
This isn't a, hey, we're so sorry, there's nothing we can do.
Okay, there's nothing we can do.
No, that wasn't an option. So they did a biopsy. They sent the biopsy to New York City, Boston, and Atlanta. Now, I had been with AFLAC for about 5 years at this point, and AFLAC sponsors Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, the AFLAC Cancer and Blood Disorder Center. And so I had known I'd known CHOA as we know it, not Atlanta. So they sent the biopsy out, and they had good results from Atlanta. And I'm like, oh, that's great. What do we do? They're like, we're cautiously optimistic. That was their terms, cautiously optimistic, because they had diagnosed it at that point as a congenital glioblastoma,
which is one of the forms that has some hope to it.
Correct.
Right.
So to your point, glioblastomas are the most aggressive, deadly brain tumors. But being that it was congenital, being that he was born with it, it was more treatable.
Correct. For my listeners who are listening to me, I'm a neuroscientist by training, so this is why I'm a little bit more understanding. I'm not just saying these things off the top of my head. I just had some context. Like, what the hell does Chris think he knows? I know a little bit about these things, sir.
And to that point, too, is that they don't typically, brain tumors are treated with radiation, and they don't radiate under the age of 3.
Okay.
So when they said they were cautiously optimistic, I was like, all right, let's go, guns a-blazing. And ironically enough, the doctor that they were communicating with in Atlanta was the same doctor I was connected with.
That's so
through
weird. Isn't that weird?
Through my people at AFLAC.
So weird.
So,
it was like it's like
our story
it's like
sucks.
it's almost like it was laid there for you and you didn't even realize, right?
I tell people all the time, our story sucks. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
I'm with AFLAC. I sell cancer insurance for a living. It's what I do. I had the cancer. This
was before.
Yeah, I added my son to all my AFLAC policies,
so crazy.
And AFLAC's hospital that they sponsor is the one that wrote my son's treatment plan. So I get chills every time I share that because it sucks, but I'm a firm believer in everything happens for a reason.
So then they then have a course that they say this is what we're going to do. And so that is, I imagine it's chemo to shrink it so they could possibly then go in and excise it. Was
Correct.
that the
Exactly.
Okay.
So the plan was 5 aggressive rounds of inpatient treatment and then 8 rounds of outpatient treatment, in hopes that it would shrink. And after 2 rounds of chemo inpatient, it actually shrunk in half. They were very, very surprised how quickly it shrunk.
And where was that here? Where was
Albany
that?
Med.
Everything was Albany Med. Okay.
So that's, again, we were so lucky they were able to do all the treatment here in Albany. We didn't have to travel.
Okay.
That's the nice thing about pediatric cancer, I guess, is that, all these hospitals talk, but you can have your treatment.
You can have your treatment
where you are.
Yep.
So after 2 rounds of chemo, the tumor shrunk in half, and Dr. Adamo, I'll name drop him. He's
Matt. Matt worked in the same lab as me. I know Matt. By the way,
walks on water.
The thing about Matt, and this is true for a lot of neurosurgeons, they are so oddly calm. I was
just going to say, he is so
like
humble.
If you talk to them, they're just like, yes, so we're basically going to go in there. And it's like, dude, and like, what I've learned about them is that their training is so extensive and they're so, that to do what they do, you have to be unflappable. Like you can't be in someone's head or spine and be like, whoa, and start freak. So like, I know Matt and I'm imagining him having a conversation right now. It's very, very soft.
Very calm. Yeah. So, well, it's funny you mentioned the hands because the social worker watched one of the surgeries when he was, extracting the tumor. And she's like, I just saw your kid's brain. And I was like, don't tell me. But then I'm thinking like, how steady does this man's hands have to be? So he had the resection.
So how long was that after everything started? So how long?
So he was diagnosed March 8th. In May, at the beginning of May, he had the first resection.
Okay.
And he was able to remove 50% of the tumor.
Okay.
And it was probably an 8-hour surgery. So, pins and needles the whole time. Your son could bleed out. He could die on the table. He could be paralyzed. All these additional worst case scenarios after you tell me.
On top of the fact that he has this tumor. Yep.
So, and Dr. Adamo, he's so, I just want to say stoic because he's just like, when he comes out of the operating room, I'm like, can you show me
Say
something with your face?
I know, that's the
I
thing.
don't
You
know.
don't know what's going on. They
And
could be
then-
like the best thing in the world has happened and they look the same.
And he pulls us into a side room. And at this point, it was so new. We had all our friends and family. There was probably at least 15, 20 people there with us. So we all, come into this room. And he's like, so I got half of it. He's doing great. He's moving all his extremities. And I was like,
my God.
So I'm just like bawling.
Oh my God.
So the next, and Logan was actually the first pediatric patient at Albany Med to have 3 EVDs, so the external ventricle drains.
Yep, okay.
So what sucked was that this is my baby. He's,
Yep.
6 months old at this time, and I literally had to clamp drains in order to move him, to hold him, to reclamp, to make sure everything was level.
So just for everybody, a ventricular drain is something they put in as to offset swelling. It'll drain out of the ventricles. Ventricles are the holes in your brain where fluid flows, and so when you have swelling and trauma, okay. So I just wanted to
Thank
give
you. No,
everyone
that's great.
So they get half.
Yep.
Now it's not done, obviously, because he
No.
still has tumor in his brain.
Yep. So Dr. Adamo came in the next day and said, okay, I want to go back in next week. And I looked at him and I go, are you a cowboy?
Yeah, like what?
Like last week you weren't sure,
Right.
and like now.
But maybe because they got us.
And that's
they
what
could
he
see
said.
it, right?
That's what he said. He said, I know what it looks like now. He's like, I know what I'm dealing with.
Right.
So
Because it's always one thing to see something on film, right? On a screen on an MRI, but I guess when they go in, okay.
correct. Yeah.
All right.
So he went back in a week later and they were able to remove 45%. So they removed a total of 95% of the
Okay.
tumor. The 5% he left was in the center of his brain.
So they didn't want to do any further
They didn't want to
damage
touch
yet.
that because I believe that is the memory bank,
Yep.
things like that. So he didn't want to touch that. And again, the surgery again, we had to wait. He came out kicking and screaming. So he wasn't paralyzed. He didn't bleed out. So we did that. But we continued the additional 3 rounds of aggressive inpatient treatment
Right, just to keep that
to
at
get the
bay or to
rest
get it- yeah.
correct. And then we ended up doing 6 rounds of outpatient. We didn't have to do the full 8 rounds because Dr. Weintraub, our oncologist, was part of a tumor board. And they're basically studying my son because I don't know if I mentioned this, he's number 87 or number 88 ever diagnosed with this particular type of tumor. So less than 100 cases documented ever. And we've had great success. And, a part of it they attest because my husband and I wouldn't take no for an answer.
So I want to ask you about that, but before I do, so everyone can understand. So eventually, did they get it all? Like, did it to the point where it's like what they call remission and they don't see
Yep.
it? So how long was that total? Was it over a year from when he was diagnosed to when they were like, no, it's gone?
So he was diagnosed March 8th, and I personally look at as the last day of treatment. So his last day of treatment and the day he got his port out was September 24th of 2018.
Okay.
So just about a year and a half he went through treatment. So
Okay.
he's been cancer and treatment free
Okay.
since September of 2018.
How did he do during the treatments? What was that like for him?
Was
it like
awful.
it was terrible?
It was awful. So he now has a feeding tube.
Okay.
After the second brain surgery, he stopped taking food by mouth. I think it's partially because of the brain injury, but I also think it's partially because the kid had chemo for the first year and a
Right,
half of
and it
his
just
life, and he
wrecked
just
things,
threw up.
yeah.
So why would you want food near your
Right,
mouth also?
right.
So he's a little over 5 right now, so he's still 100% tube fed. I mentioned, like I said, he does have a brain injury from where the tumor is,
Right.
or where the tumor was. So it affected his left frontal lobe, which typically affects your personality, impulse control, feeding, speech.
But I watched a couple videos of him. I'm sorry, but like I watched a couple videos of him on like laughing and crying, and like I'm like seeing him like my son. I'm saying to myself like he's just a boy, like like he's just a kid, and you can see his emotion, and it's like. Yes, he's gone through all this trauma, and you're mentioning all the things he doesn't have, but you must like look at that and be like,
He's
it's just
overcome.
sweet, like
He's a good kid. I said the left frontal lobe affects your personality. It did not affect my kid's personality at all.
Right, that's what I'm saying. You can see it.
He's got such a mix of my husband and I. I'm like an in-your-face type of person, and my husband is laid back and chill, and that's my kid. My kid is totally chill and calm, but when he wants you to know something, he
Right.
will tell you. And he will kick and scream and fight, but he will still do it.
What about verbally? How is that affected? I mean, I imagine, does he speak?
So they told us first that he wouldn't survive. They told us he would never walk. And I tell people he doesn't walk, he runs. They told me he would never talk and probably never eat. a year and a half ago, the developmental pediatrician said, yeah, forget I told you he'd never talk. He knows all his shapes and colors. He can count to 20.
Jeez.
He can count backwards from 10. He knows the alphabet. He's now putting 3 to 4 words together. So now he can communicate a little better and say, I want.
Oh, that's great.
And tell us what he wants.
That's great.
He's got, the biggest issue is the impulsivity. I mean, you can see my hands.
Yeah.
He's an attack child,
Yeah.
but he doesn't know any better.
Right, exactly.
And he's really trying, and he's smart, and he's a fighter, and he doesn't give up.
Well, he's like you. He's like his parents. So, I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
So, where does that come from? Have you always been like that? Have you always been a fighter? Have you struggled? Have you been through struggle in your life, or is it just you're just a mom in a moment where you're like, this is my kid, and I'm never going to give up? I often wonder when people are tested like that. I put myself in that position, different but related. My wife's mom passed very young, and she had a sudden heart attack, and she was in the hospital for 4 months, and we didn't know. And I remember you go through that. It's that how. You often wonder, what am I going to do in that situation? How would I handle it? And when we were in that, it was awful. But you figure out a way to get through it. Do you think anybody can do that, or does it take a certain type of person? People hearing this are there's no way I can do it. But you're not in it, right? I guess when you're in it.
Yeah. So I used to say that if it were your child, you would do the same thing. But unfortunately, witnessing other families while we were fighting cancer, there was another little boy that was fighting cancer, a brain tumor as well, that the family was never there. And he's around my son's age and still can't even sit up on his own. So I used to say, yeah, you would do it too, but I don't know.
Right.
You
don't know,
you either
right?
have it or you don't.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't wait till I was 40 to have my first kid to have him taken away.
Right.
And I also look at it as I was chosen for this journey, because if I was 20 and had him, maybe I wouldn't know what to do.
Right.
I've had my life experiences.
Yeah.
I've lived my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've always been a type A type person, but as far as other travesties, nothing.
Just the regular,
just
the struggles
life,
of normal life, right? Right. Yeah.
Dating horrible men and,
All that could be
job
part
hopping,
of
but,
right,
whatever, that's life.
Your husband, I want to talk to you about this because my wife and we've talked about, I watched her go through that terrible time, and it affects your relationship when something like this happens. And I can only imagine when it's your kid. That it could do two things. It could completely drive you apart and make your relationship a mess and destroy that as well. And possibly if it took a terrible turn, maybe it would. But how did that work out with you're still together with your husband, but did it strengthen it? Was it difficult at that time to be in a I imagine the only thing you're thinking about is your kid, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the first few months, we were each other's rock. If I was upset, he would pull me up, or if he was upset, I would pull him up. So we had that balance. But after that, he had to go back to work full time.
Right. I was going to, yeah.
So
right.
I was the one in the hospital.
You were in the trenches there.
So it did cause some friction. I remember one evening, Logan stopped tracking. The chemo was working. He had a shunt, and the chemo was working, so the particles from the tumor clogged his shunt. So he stopped tracking, and I could tell. And I remember my husband and I got in a huge fight that night, and I was like, I don't want to talk to you. And then at 1 o'clock in the morning, this happened, so I had to call him, and I was like, you need to come here now.
Right.
So, even though we had that friction,
but
we still knew at the end of the day, our goal was to
You were aligned
help our
in that.
son. Right. Yeah. Right. It was definitely difficult. We see counselor now. I go, he goes, we go together.
Yeah.
So it's definitely beneficial. We still have our moments. It's hard because he is a full-time, he works full-time.
Right, because this is like a real,
and our journey doesn't just end with, him being cancer-free. He has a brain injury now. He can't do quote unquote normal things. And I don't like to compare. It's hard not to, but it's hard. And I think I joked in the book too, I don't know if I could handle the normal kid. Seriously, because my kid is so chill and laid back. Yes, he attacks me. Yes, I have to feed him via a feeding tube. No, he can't, communicate and he can't talk to me. But he's super chill and he's fun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Where I don't know if I could have a regular 5-year-old talking back to me all the time.
God. Yeah, I know, you're right. It's true. When you think about it, it's so true. Oh my God. what about, last question, and before I talk about the foundation, is like, talk about like your support you had in the time, because, in hospital life is like a life. Mm-hmm. It's like a disastrous situation. Mm-hmm. Again, we did a bit different story, but what about support in all of that? Like you had family, you had people there for mm-hmm. you, and how much did that matter and help you?
It was super helpful. I would stay when Logan was inpatient. We literally lived at Albany Med for the better part of 6 months. We were home maybe 2 weeks out of that 6-month period. And I would stay in the hospital during the week. My husband's mother would stay on the weekends. My mother.
You would stay there?
I lived in the hospital with my son. And if you need help packing tips for the hospital, I got them for you.
You got it.
So I would stay during the week. My husband's mother would stay on the weekends with my husband's dad. And then my mom and my father would rotate. And I had friends here and there. We limited it. We only had a couple of other people in addition because he was getting chemo and he was constantly immunocompromised.
Right. You want to get infections
so we really
and stuff,
kept our circle really close. Even when we came home, even when he went through the outpatient treatment, our circle was extremely, extremely close. So during COVID, that was nothing for us, right? Like been there, done that.
You're like, we can do this.
Quarantine, we got this.
Did he have certain restrictions though, or for COVID? Like, was he considered like in a higher risk or no? Like,
so no. So the good thing with Logan is now he sees a regular pediatrician, and the constant reminder that I get from Dr. Weintraub is that he's just a regular kid.
He's just a regular kid, right?
So he's all caught up. He's all caught up on all his, regular immunizations, which obviously had to stop during treatment. But he's all caught up, and he's a normal kid by all those medical standards.
Yep. So the foundation. So when did you start the foundation?
Right in the middle of treatment.
Was?
Why not?
Is that really when it was?
Yeah. So he was diagnosed March of 2017, finished treatment in September of 2018. We started the foundation in January of 2018.
Jeez. And was that just like you just were on this mission to like I have to be able to help, or like if other people are going through this, I need to somehow like lend to that
I've always been a giver. I'm in Rotary, and our first Rotary project 11 years ago was the Bins of Fun for Albany Med.
Okay.
So we would donate bins of toys to the Melody Center. And I remember being in PICU one day, and Rob Saba, who works at the Albany Med Foundation, came in and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "That's my kid." He's like, "What?" So it was like a full circle thing. And I've always been a giver. I've always given back. And there's fantastic local childhood cancer organizations here in our area and nationally. But going through it, I found things that were missing.
Right. You were there.
Right.
You
so
saw.
Simple things like bracelets. We provide bracelets to our families for fundraising.
Okay.
Simple fundraiser, and it brings awareness.
Cool. That's cool.
They can sell them for $1, $5, whatever they want.
Yep.
We give them 500 bracelets. Do whatever you want with them.
Okay. Cool.
Part of the mission with the foundation is not just providing for the families, but also raising awareness, because there's other cancers that get more attention.
Yeah, of course.
And my philosophy, obviously not only because it's my child, but my philosophy is, if we can heal these kids, maybe they can be the ones in the future to heal us all.
To heal us all, right, yeah.
So we do T-shirt fundraising campaigns for our kids. We provide gas cards. We provide food gift cards to the families. We also...
And what do they do? Do they reach out? Do they like apply for it? Like, what is the process for families?
So we typically work with Melody Center at Albany Med.
Okay.
We do have some families, through our own personal networks on the board.
Okay.
Like right now we're helping a kid in Florida, a friend of a friend in Florida. We've helped somebody in Texas, but that's all, through networking. But primarily we get our families through Albany Med. We get a statement from the child life specialist saying, "Hey, this child was just diagnosed.
I see.
They need this and this."
This and that. Okay.
So when we get that, we send family
I see.
an application for our services along with gift cards.
Okay.
And if they want our services, they fill out the application. We do the bracelets, the T-shirt fundraising campaigns. We give them more gift cards if that's what they need. We also do an Amazon wish list.
Oh, okay.
So
that's cool.
Yeah, so the family or the children can just go on and say, I need new toys, or I need new clothes, or whatever the case may be. Sometimes we've done for families, sometimes have to go to New York City for treatment. So on that wish list, they'll put a comforter or lights to make their room look nice, or whatever they need to help comfort them during their time.
That's and do you have these little fundraising? Do you have like a fundraiser, a big one that you do, or do you do little activities here and there? Like what
our biggest fundraiser is our golf tournament in September. So this year it's September 19th at the Fairways of Half Moon.
Okay.
We have a couple of fundraisers throughout the year. Our next one we have coming up is we are part of the Albany lacrosse game on April 30th. So there's a link actually on our Facebook page to purchase tickets for that. We just get money back from the tickets. And then in May, we do our walk for the kids that can't. So September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which is why we do the golf tournament. And then May is Brain Tumor Awareness Month. So both.
So you do them in both those.
Yep, both corresponding with Logan.
The website, where can people go if they want to just see more, or want to donate, or want to find out more about
LoganStrongFoundation.org.
LoganStrongFoundation.org. And there's a Facebook page as well?
Correct.
Okay. Yep. All right, cool.
And I do want to make mention too, the other thing we do for the kids, we give no touching signs. They're no touching, your germs are too big for me.
Oh, that's
so
cute.
There's signs that we give to the families, because when the kids are on chemo, you don't want to be touched.
Right, and they're still kids.
And especially like with us, we had a baby. Like everybody wants to touch the baby, and it's like, stay away from
Get
my
away,
kid.
don't touch.
I don't want your germs.
Don't touch.
And then we also we call them ochos. They're crocheted octopi. So it's a little crocheted octopus, and somebody sent one to Logan when he was going through treatment, and he just fell in love with it. So it's one of our trademarks that we do.
That's cute.
They're actually designed for children in NICU, for babies in NICU, because they symbolize the umbilical cord.
Oh.
So I actually have one on my desk because it's just calming. I should have brought one. They're adorable. So if any crocheters are out there and want to knit an octopus, I'll give you the pattern.
That is so interesting.
Yeah. So we love those.
That's cool. That's cool. I want to actually look that up. That's a cool concept. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Before we go, I want to ask you about like your life post. Like, do you like? And I'm thinking about this. When you have your phone next to you, and you said to me, "I need to keep my phone here." You know, how are you in that world and in your mental health space after this? It's like a traumatic event, and it's like post-traumatic stress. Are you anxious about it? Like, I mean, one of the things I remember that came from this trauma with my wife is that this idea that at any given time something can disappear or something can go. And like, you think about that in life, but you don't ever think about it until something like that really happens to you. It jars you.
Yeah.
Do you struggle with that now? And what do you do to try to help offset that?
Yeah. We still try to look at the positive, right?
Yep.
We still try to look at him as a normal,
like how far
normal
you've come
child.
And
You know, he has graduated to annual MRIs, which is huge. And she said in a couple of years, it'll be every other year, which would be like crazy. And I notated in my book too, like I felt like living in the hospital was easier than not, because you always had these people to help you. And now it's just my husband and I, and people here and there.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, the PTSD is real. If I get a call from school, my son got COVID in February. We kept him safe for 2 years, and all of a sudden we have no idea how he got it. So like my anxiety was high.
Yeah. It's just like extra
But
sensitive.
he was literally fine within 24 hours. Like it was totally fine. But your anxiety's high. Or if he has a stomach bug, we have to be very careful to keep him hydrated, because he's 100% tube fed. So if he has a stomach bug and he's throwing up, we typically have to go to the hospital because he has to get on IV fluids.
Right.
Because that's the only nutrition he has. So as normal as things are, there's still exceptions to the rule. So I'm very cautious. Like, yes, he's at school right now. So I'm like, okay, all right, we're good. I always just try to make sure, like, if I'm not with him, or if my husband's not with
somehow
him,
there's a connection there.
Somebody can get
like
a hold of me. And I don't know if that's just I'm sure it's a typical parent thing, but
it is
amplified
but like,
with him.
It's got to be just extra more than that. I mean, like, I have to imagine that. Like, yes, like, before this interview, my phone was in there and I grabbed it because they'll typically call me. But that's just because like of being a parent. But I think there's an extra layer that is there for you.
Right, like he's got a feeding tube. If his feeding tube falls out, if it doesn't go back in,
I can totally,
within a certain amount of time, he's got to go get surgery. So I have to make sure I'm available.
Makes total sense. On this show, we talk to a lot of people about the things in life and their business that they've run into, that they've had to overcome. And every single thing that we've talked to people, not to discount anyone's struggle, because everyone's struggle is their own.
Agreed.
And there's no way to really quantify what that means to you individually, right? This is something on its face that is clearly a struggle that is a very rare one, is a very traumatic one. And so it puts a lot of things in perspective. And I'm sure you're asked this a lot. If somebody is struggling or they're going through something that seems really daunting, seems like, I don't think I can do this, what do you say to them? What are some like words from someone that's so strong that has pulled through something like this or gotten yourself to this point at least? What do you say to people like that?
First, you just have to survive the moment, right? You just have to breathe and accept what's happening and figure it out. If you got to cry, if you have to scream, if you have to shut down for a day
Whatever
or two,
it is you have to
do what
do.
it is what you have to do. Then take a step back, figure out what's needed.
Yep.
And then figure it out, face it, put your big girl panties on,
Right, and just
do what you got to do.
Do what you got to do.
Because you're the only you're ever going to have.
Right.
So how you face that and how you overcome it is what you have to do.
You never let anyone tell you, despite how much they said, no, it can't. You were just like, sorry.
The worst case scenario.
Until that day happens, there's no way you're going to get rid of me.
Yep.
And I think that's got to be it, especially with something when it's like that.
Yep. The worst case scenario was never an option.
Right. Because in the end, so what? You're either going to give it your best or you're going to try everything. Because if you're telling me it's going to go there, well, why the hell not should I try to do everything possible?
Right.
Right? What's the downside to that? Right? And that's what that is. It's like that really strong determination. You gotta be able to do it. So I have the book right here. I know you can get it on Amazon. Where else can we find the book for people that are local? Maybe they can find it.
Yeah, locally right now it's available at Life Made Simple Boutique in Burnt Hills. I am trying to work with other local bookstores, but right now that's where it is. And then Amazon, of course.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
I mean, I was, when Sharon here at Overit, she was telling me about this story, I started to researching it. I always put myself in these situations, and like, it's hard for me even to imagine. So like for everything that you have done and continue to do for your son, like it's amazing. So
thank you
so much for coming in today.
It. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.